Good morning. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Minneapolis Audit Committee for Monday, February 5th. It's the first meeting of the year for our Audit Committee. My name is Lene Palmisano, and I'm the chair of this committee. And with me here at the dais are the following committee members. Some of them are new. We have Councilmember Abdi Warsami, who chairs Ways and Means for us this term. Councilmember Jeremy Schrader, Mr. Scott Neal, Mr. David Fisher, and we also have Park Commissioner Chris Meyer, who will be here shortly. Please let the record reflect that we have a quorum. And without objection, I'd like to ask Mr. Scott Neal to continue in his role of vice chair. Is that acceptable to you?
Thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That is approved. Thank you. Colleagues, we have an agenda today that includes receiving and filing an update report on body-worn cameras from the Minneapolis Police Department, and then under new business, we'll hear the internal audit annual report, as well as other updates and reports from our internal audit department, and a presentation of the 2018 audit plan. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. First, we'll accept the minutes from our last meeting on September 19th of last year. I recognize some of you weren't part of this committee. I have gone over them thoroughly, and so I will move adoption of those minutes. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the minutes are adopted. Item number 3 on our agenda is receiving an update report on the Minneapolis Police Department mobile video and body-worn camera audit. For this update, we'll hear from Kirill Vasiliev from our internal audit department. Mr. Vasiliev.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Kirill Vasiliev, and I'm a manager in the internal audit department. So for this first item is a brief update on the staff direction we received from this committee at the September 19th meeting to work with MPD to address the issues identified in the body-worn camera report. So in the intervening time, we have had a Super Bowl, which has been very time-consuming for MPD staff, but we have also had 7 policy work groups where myself and staff from the police department, Office of Police Conduct Review, and some police department policy folks sat in a room and went through the current body-worn camera policy and went through some potential updates, revisions to be in line with the issues identified in the report. That draft has been completed and is, last I heard, circulating internally within MPD for kind of a first check, and will be continuing onward to City Attorney's Office and other stakeholders before it gets finalized. So I believe that was a lot of work to make sure that the policy was revised consistent with the audit report and consistent with all the other MPD policies, because sometimes when you change one, it affects a few others. So there was a lot of work by this work group. So there's also been some progress on other elements. I know the police department's put it together a more formal supervisor review process. There's been also additional employees brought on to do civilian kind of audit reviews of the footage, as well as some other steps. The next steps for the police department is, as I mentioned, to circulate and finalize the policy. And then there's also staff directions that came from public safety to the police department to provide some information to them. And I believe that's occurring February 15th at the next public safety meeting. And I believe that report will include a response to the audit report, and our intention from the audit perspective is to take that response and use it as the foundation for the follow-up that we'll be doing going forward related to this audit. So That means that not just the policy items, but some of the way things that were implemented that could have been improved or had gaps with expectations, that's what we'll be looking at to follow up on and address in that follow-up process. And that's my update.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? I have a couple. I do want to point out that Deputy Chief Halverson has been very accepting of this audit while he isn't here. A lot of our police department has been very involved in all of the work that's gone into preparing for this large event called the Super Bowl that just ended. I also want to point out that unlike other audits that we have done, this isn't about just agreeing or disagreeing with findings. It has a policy piece and it also has a practice piece in how we make progress on this. So we appreciate that. There are 3, I believe, staff directions, correct me if I'm wrong, that will be coming back, and our understanding is that they are part of the February 15th public safety meeting, and I will be asking a lot of questions there. One of those requirements, or one of those directions given from council, was for the police department to come back and do quarterly reports based on this audit last fall. One of those quarterly reports may or may not be given at the February 15th meeting, but it does occur to me that we never really said what should a quarterly report contain. And so I do plan to bring some of those elements to that meeting as a suggestion that come from this work last fall. Thank you for this update. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, great. I'd like to move this report. May I have a second? It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. With that, excuse me, clerk, can you tell me, do we need to publish there isn't a report specifically that comes with that, so are we ordering anything published? Okay, thank you. So the next item on our agenda is to move to a report on the 2017 work and efforts of our internal audit department. Mr. Vasiliev.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for 2017, there's an annual report that will be published at the end of this meeting. So I'm just going to cover some of the highlights here. We completed 6 projects, including 5 audits and a consultation. Relative to prior years, last year we completed 6 audits and 3 other projects, and in 2015 it was 2 audits and 4 other projects when the department was still rolling, getting started. We also, at the end of this year, have partial work on a couple of significant other projects that got delayed because of changes to our audit plan from last year. I did want to highlight that we have our initial audit plan that was approved just about a year ago for 2017 on the left, and the final plan with the various changes on the right that I do want to highlight, which was we had the addition of another third-party audit with Diversion Solutions and Minneapolis as the 2 audits that are occurring there, a significant increase in scope of the police mobile video body-worn camera related audit, and the addition of the automated license plate reader audit. And also, our results from last year included work on findings and corrective actions. 2017 began with 73 open items. The way we started tracking these things in 2015 and 16 was a little bit looser. So some of these were findings, some were recommendation, and some were a management action plan item. In 2017, we began a much more formal process to collect these feedback reports, so we can report these more uniformly going forward. Of those 73 items, 16 were as completed during 2017, and we added 14 findings to the follow-up procedures as a result of the audits that we completed. as part of our process, we do have client satisfaction surveys. These surveys are collected by the Audit Committee Chair's office so that hopefully people are honest when they respond to survey requests. These questions are written to ideally not let respondents ding us if they don't like that we got an audit of their area, but were questions like, was the entrance conference useful, or were we respectful of staff time, to make sure that we're hitting those key areas. Overall, we're still looking more or less positive. We did have some slightly less glowing recommendations around audit planning and communication. As part of our response to that, we'll be focusing on making sure our entrance meetings are clear and more useful to the process. And I also believe that there might be a few additional surveys coming in at year end, so I can provide an update to these numbers at the next audit committee meeting.
I'm going to stop you there, and Mr. Neal has a question. I have a question as well. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Celia, can you tell us what we're looking at? The numbers, is it excellent plus good, or just excellent? What are we characterize the numbers for us, please?
Sure. Madam Chair, Mr. Neal, the satisfaction surveys are rated from inadequate to excellent with 5 scales, or not applicable. The 2015 and 16 figures were put together by the prior audit director, Mr. Tetzel, and I'm not sure the methodology he used, but for 2017, I gave us a 0 if something was inadequate and 100 if it was perfect, and then 25, 50, 75 for the in-between ratings. So for 2017, if somebody said we were adequate down the board, it would have been 50%.
Thank you.
So I just want to acknowledge that it seems that if you look at this just by the numbers, the audit planning number went down last year. Can you share a little bit about that? Because my guess would have been that perhaps that's because we needed to move some things around, so things that were maybe on the agenda that fell to a lower priority, so they maybe were expecting to start work, like say in second quarter, and it didn't start till fourth quarter or something like that. Or can you help us understand a little bit more what audit planning is and how it might be that last year that measure went down a little bit?
Madam Chair, from what I recall, the survey results, it was how useful that entrance meeting was to prepare the audited area for the audit. In particular, laying out what we were looking for in terms of data needs and other expectations. And that was the main driver for it dipping from the mid-80s down to 70.
I see. Thank you. Also, I want to just acknowledge for committee members that might be new, we do these audit client surveys. They come out from my office just as a way to be one step removed from the people that have done the work, so that departments that have been audited can just give some good feedback at the very beginning of the rebuilding of this department. We used it to really see, what are we doing well? What do we need to be doing better? I read these surveys. It has been very helpful, and as you can see, it's been overwhelmingly positive. But it's important that we keep on measuring and making sure the internal audit is providing value to the departments that they audit. In addition, the extra step of what we have built audit into be is to be helping to build the public trust in our enterprise. So I think these numbers still look quite good. I also want to say that in terms of the body-worn camera audit, we are still seeking and getting back client surveys from different parts of the department that this audit was shared with, and some of them still need to come back. So those will be incorporated in the 2017 numbers once they do. So, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you.
Mr. Vasilius, I note that the 2015-2016 scoring was done by your predecessor, and that you made your own for this year. I just recommend perhaps you could come up with a standardized way of scoring so that we can at least have this for future reference, and we're sure we're looking at the same types of references in doing the evaluations.
Madam Chair, Mr. Fisher, I completely agree. I did try to figure out the approaches for the 15 and 16 numbers and got within 1 or 2 percentage points, but it wasn't exact, so I didn't want to say that I cracked his code.
Thank you. Any other questions? May I have a motion to receive and file this report?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and this motion passes. Next, we'll move to the IT third-party consult report from Nikhil D'Souza of Backbone Consultants. Mr. D'Souza?
Good morning, Madam Chair and esteemed members of the Audit Committee. My name is Nikhil D'Souza. I'm a partner at Backbone Consultants. We're a local minority-owned IT cybersecurity firm. And so we've been working with the city for about 3 years. And last year, we decided to do an evaluation of OneNeck. So OneNeck is a third-party provider for IT services to the city of Minneapolis. And they're the largest dollar spent for the entire IT department. So we thought they were the biggest risk to focus it on. And so we wanted to review the security and privacy of OneNeck. So how do they operate? Because the biggest risk to us as a city is our third party operating in a secure manner, or is there a risk to our data or our privacy? And we approached this by reviewing the independent audit report, the SOC 2 report on OneNeck, and we found actually no findings to report back to the committee with respect to any concerns on the practices of security and privacy at OneNeck Solutions. So overall, this was a consultation that resulted in a positive response in finding out that our third-party provider for IT, OneNeck Solutions, has adequate security and privacy practices to consider the city of Minneapolis's data and overall IT infrastructure secure. Do you have any questions?
Questions? Not yet.
Awesome. Well, that's all I have.
I do want to point out that, so OneNeck, to add to Mr. D'Souza's description of it, OneNeck holds all of our shared drives and data at the city, and there's a lot of physical items here. So a recent contract change, the Unisys to OneNeck change, made this a good candidate for auditing. So just to give a little bit of historical context, that's why it was on our audit report.
Yep. OneNeck, to Councilwoman's point out, it is hosts and actually has a lot of the city's shared drive data in addition to other key infrastructure and systems. So that's why it was selected as part of the audit. And when Carol will come up here and present the 2018 audit plan, you'll notice that we're going to continue the third-party theme and make it a little bit broader outside of just OneNeck, but that'll be for 2018.
Great.
Awesome.
Doesn't look like there are any questions up here.
No, this was actually straightforward. It was very pleasant to actually see an IT provider. One thing I would call out that they're called OneNeck because they like to be accountable, the one neck to choke. If anything goes wrong, that's why they named themselves that. I pride them on being that accountable, and I applaud them for their security and privacy practices. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Without other questions from the committee, may I have a motion to receive, file, and publish these reports? Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and this motion passes. The next item on our agenda is our internal auditor's report on the automated license plate reader program. So here to present again is Mr. Vasiliev. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The automated license plate readers program was audit to the audit plan mid-2017. Automated license plate readers are used to do exactly what it sounds like. They're used by our police department to automatically read in license plate numbers and where the license plate reader numbers are being read in at. So the location, the time, the number. It's used for a variety of police applications and intelligence operations. This audit came up because the Minnesota state statutes requires a biennial audit of license plate reader programs to ensure that the jurisdictions that have them are using them appropriately and are properly safeguarding the data. So for this project, our main objectives were to ensure compliance with state statutes for our police department. And the way this was organized is different from our other audits because when we started looking at this project, we consulted with the Minnesota Department of Administration, which receives these reports. And as a result of that conversation, we actually arranged to exchange audit services with the Hennepin County Audit Compliance and Investigation Services Department. So we audited their program and they audited our program, both at no cost, saving both the county and the city however much it would cost to hire consultants to do this work. So as a result of all this, the audits were run independently, but they covered the exact same statutes and they covered the same scope and objectives in a very similar manner. The results of the audit of our police department, which again was conducted by the Hennepin County auditors, is that the police department was compliant with state statutes. And I believe as part of the materials that we have for this area is a response from the Minnesota Department of Administration confirming that they have received this report and that we are good to go for 2 years until the next biennial audit. And our audit of the Sheriff's Office was completed and presented to the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office in December of 2017, so that hopefully they were able to file it to the appropriate locations. Our report also identified no major issues with their compliance with state statutes. And because whenever we do an audit, we always see areas for improvement, not just findings. Both teams are intending to have a meeting now that the enforcement groups are no longer focused on the Super Bowl, to have a kind of a feedback and a process improvement area. So we're hoping that as a result of all this, we will also have areas where our police department can improve their program a little bit.
Thank you. Are there any questions or thoughts on this? This was a good collaboration that worked out well between our two jurisdictions. And I think that was creative and I think it was well managed. So thank you for participating in that. Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vasiliev, is this audit conducted like an annual financial audit where you're drawing samples of LPR data, or does this literally consist of a review of every single record, every time an LPR record was made?
Madam Chair, Mr. Neal, so it depends on which element of the state statutes we were looking at. So, for example, one of the elements is that the enforcement authority must maintain a public log of use. So either there is a public log of use or there isn't a public log of use. There's not much sampling to do there. There's also specific types of data that can be maintained and specific access allowances that are supposed to be set up to the system that contains the data. So in those cases, it's kind of a pass-fail without sampling. Some of the items included, for example, that data was accessed for an appropriate law enforcement reason. And for those instances, and also for instances of whether the access was appropriate, there was some sampling done because you would have hundreds of accesses to data. And so we reviewed a set number of those accesses to make sure that it included the required information by state statute.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? May I have a motion to receive, file, and publish these reports?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and this motion passes. Thank you. With that, we'll move to the off-street parking audit. We're just chugging through these today. There's been a little bit of a backlog, so we don't usually have this many reports to go over, but Mr. Vasiliev will continue to present this report as well.
The off-street parking operator audit was part of our original 2017 audit plan. It focused on the contract that the city has with ABM, which operates all of the city-owned ramps, of which there are 17 in the city. It is one of the largest non-construction related dollar contracts that the city has to operate these ramps. And the operations include not only spending money to make sure they're functioning, but also collecting revenue and remitting it to the city. The objectives of this project were not only to determine compliance with key requirements of the contract, but also to evaluate how well Public Works is managing the contract. For the scope and approach for this audit, we reviewed Public Works contract management practices, and we also focused on many provisions of the contract from areas of record keeping, revenue collection, invoicing, service and maintenance requirements, and safety requirements and subcontracting requirements. We reviewed how ABM ensured compliance with the contract in those areas and did some substantive sampling, ramp walkthroughs, records reviews, and we are actually issuing a no findings report because they are doing a pretty good job. And we also noted no instances where the City Public Works oversight was significantly lacking. ABM as an organization actually includes their own internal audit department just for the city contract. So they've got a pretty good set of internal controls and pretty good oversight on the inside, which we weren't familiar with until we started asking them how they ran things. So I think it was a very helpful exercise to show and provide some assurance that our parking ramps seem to be operated as well as we can expect.
Mr. Vasiliev, is it fairly unusual to not issue any findings for an audit that's of this size and with a vendor like this?
Madam Chair, I would say it depends, but I usually expect to find something significant and report worthy. There were minor issues here and there, but nothing that seemed to rise to the level of needing to put in a finding and require either a contract update or a contract revision or a contract review. Example of this is some of the elevators had expired registration certificates posted, which ended up being a non-issue because that doesn't correlate with elevator inspections. It was just a piece of paper that the city registration group either never sent or ABM never received and put up. But it seemed like that's the level of issues that we saw a couple of places, and it was not a something worth putting in a report.
Thank you. In my recollection, I don't think we've ever had a full audit done without any findings at the end of it. Is that your understanding too?
I believe you're correct.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts and questions, Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vasiliev, I had two questions, actually. One was, I just wanted to make sure that I understood this too, because it did seem like a very large contract without any findings at the end, that it included the fiscal side of it, as in an independent fiscal audit. So is there did your work include some reconciliation of cars go in, cars go out, money, and some kind of reconciliation between those two factors or not?
Madam Chair, Mr. Neal, I'd have to review the specific steps that were taken. I do know we did review how the operator managed its cash collections and revenue collections facilities, and we reviewed the work done by our Public Works Department to reconcile everything.
Okay.
I believe we did go through the reconciliations that are kept and made by ABM to track this sort of work on their end, and that they were accurate, but I'd have to double check.
Okay.
So it was more of a assessing whether or not their controls seemed to be functioning well and whether or not the reconciliations they were doing appeared to be accurate.
My second question is about data security. So, of course, it's a subject we just dealt with. But in addition to a lot of cash going back and forth in a parking garage management situation, you also have the data security of credit cards and debit cards and so forth. Did your work include some kind of look at whether data security, and privacy issues were managed appropriately?
Madam Chair, Mr. Neal, yes, we looked at the, I forget the term, but anybody that collects credit card numbers needs to go through some sort.
PCI.
Yes,
Yeah.
PCI, thank you. PCI compliance, and we reviewed their PCI compliance reporting, and there weren't any issues. In part, they use ski data machines to collect all the credit card information that gets transmitted to the credit card processors. So they don't, for all those card readers, when you enter and exit a parking ramp, they don't hold that data. It goes from the machines to the card collectors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts and questions? I guess not. May I have a motion to receive, file, and publish this report? Moved by Mr. Fisher, seconded by Mr. Schrader. Sorry, Councilmember Schrader. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and this motion passes. So finally today, we will hear a presentation on our 2018 internal audit plan from Mr. Vasiliev. I want to acknowledge that in the study session that we did last week, we did have a lot of discussion as to how things come about onto an audit plan. And this will be the one that we're putting in place here at the beginning of 2018. So Mr. Vasiliev, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the audit plan presentation, I broke the plan up into 3 parts. So the first part will be the audit projects that our internal audit staff will be handling. The second part will be consultations and staff directions and other items that we'll be addressing this year. And the third slide covers the projects that will be headed up by the co-sourced IT auditors, Backbone Consultants. So it's a little bit different from the written out plan that was part of the materials for this audit, for this presentation, but I think it's organized in a way that makes it easier to talk about. So the first portion are the audits that we are planning to execute this year. The first 3 items on here are carryovers from the 2017 audit plan, which due to staffing and extra projects that were added onto the plan last year, ended up being in various states of completion, but not quite finished in 2017. So there's 2 third-party audits, one of Meet Minneapolis, which is about halfway finished currently, and a audit of diversion solutions, which was included at the request of City Attorney's Office And Diversion Solutions is the organization that runs programs to assist individuals with obtaining their licenses after they've had so many tickets that cause their licenses to be revoked. So they work with the state and with various jurisdictions. They enable people to do things like get a license so that they can go to work, so that they can pay off their fees, so that they can keep their license. Otherwise, folks can easily fall into the problem of losing a license, being unable to go to work, being unable to pay tickets, getting late fees, and kind of spiraling downwards. We're most of the way through that project right now. And the final carryover is a payroll audit, which we're focusing on our internal controls and reviewing whether or not there's any instances of payroll fraud at the city. That audit was intended to happen late 2017 to correspond with a lull for the finance department in terms of year-end close materials, but we had a body camera audit that we sunk significant time into. And we're currently waiting a little bit until year-end close has closed out and the financial audit by the state auditors is closed out. And then we'll be continuing that a little bit later in the year. The first new audit on here and the second one both relate to records retention. Our objectives are to partner with city clerk's records staff and use their expertise to review record retention at CPED and at Public Works. This is a particularly timely audit because CPED is located in the Crown Roller building and our lease is expiring in 2020, for which we're building a new building to house them and various other city staff in place of where currently there's a parking ramp. So to help them manage their records, because they do have a lot of paper records in that building, we want to get through this project this year so that they're not trying to figure out what to do with pieces of paper at the last minute as they're moving. CPED was also very interested and happy to have this project be done. So I think they'll be a very good partnership. And as part of these two audits, we hope that the city clerk records staff picks up some new tricks and are able to execute similar projects across the city to help them manage records in the city. The final audit on here is a grant management audit, reviewing both the city's and the park board's practices for managing grants of various sizes. It's not going to be targeting any one specific grant, except for maybe as part of our sampling to make sure that things are actually being executed properly. But it's more looking at our controls and how we monitor our grants and ensure that we're compliant with the strings that were attached to those grants. In part, this audit came about because the state auditor's comprehensive annual financial report identified some grant compliance issues at the park board, and it seems like a time when there might be fewer grants available for us to use, and so we want to make sure that we're using the grants that we do get effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Vasiliev. I want to point out, and you might have just, and I just lost track of it for a second, that grant making is a very decentralized function, and that this is important to do, and it was highlighted in the CAFR State Auditor's report over the past couple of years, I believe. Just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. I can move on to the consulted projects. There's no other questions about the audit projects.
Questions on the slide? Nope, go ahead.
So for consultations and projects, the first item on here is a little complicated. We flagged affordable housing as a priority area and as an area where a lot of city objectives and goals seem to circle around. As I was doing some background work to be able to put this together, we identified that Believe it or not, we're not the only group thinking that. And so there's a work group that was established by Mayor Fry. There's now a city council committee focused on affordable housing. There's a long-range planning group at CPED that's updating the comprehensive plan. And of course, there's some audit recommendations from a Loan C audit that was done a few years ago by our office that focus on goals and reporting on loan programs that also overlap with this. So in speaking with CPED, us doing an audit on top of all the other work that's going on seemed a little bit invasive and possibly even distracting. So rather than doing an audit, I believe our best position here is more of a consultative project with the idea that we would take time and have touch points with these individual groups that are working on this already, something like once a month or more or less frequently, depending on how the work is progressing, and see whether there's any opportunities in there for audit to add value. The specific ways we could add value would be from an audit perspective to validate some of the numbers that are being used for decision making. If we're blindly relying on something without really knowing whether or not it's right, that's a place where we could come in and do a little bit of work, research, and analysis to validate that. We also would have opportunities to do research or assessments of arising issues as they come up if these groups are not sure how to deal with them, to do some validation of goals that get set so that we don't end up setting goals before our department that it's unable to meet, and also to potentially flag times when maybe these groups are doing the same thing in parallel and maybe aren't being as efficient as they could be. And if as a result of all this, we don't have any work to do on affordable housing because everyone's doing a great job, then I will be very happy. But I'm sure that throughout this process, there'll be opportunities for us to weigh in on how things are working and to assess whether or not we're setting realistic goals for ourselves. The other two consultations on here are a consultation with Fleet Services Division. Public Works requested that we weigh in on their work to restructure and optimize their business model. So we will be putting a little bit of time on that. We have a consultation with Neighborhood Community Relations Group. They are working through some changes to how neighborhoods are being overseen by the city. And as part of that involves a financial component. And they asked us to weigh in on potential internal controls and other audit related and risk management related matters that they're looking to put in place. The fourth item on here is more of a staff research project, and it really ties in with the work that Backbone will be doing on business continuity and disaster recovery. Our portion here will be a survey of what critical systems we know about across the city to put that together as a baseline. This will help inform our review of whether or not we're cutting off access appropriately, at least for the things we know. And this will also help inform our emergency management department as they are working to update the citywide emergency action plans in the upcoming year, I believe. Second to last item is a project on...
Excuse me, Mr. Vasiliev. One moment. Mr. Fisher has a question.
Of course.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vasiliev, the audit or consultation, I guess, and projects concerning business continuity and disaster recovery seems like an immense project. I mean, would it include, I assume, data, but it could include auditing the water department or auditing any type of system that protects the citizens of the city. Is that an accurate assessment?
Madam Chair, Mr. Fisher, The scope of this specific project is more of an inventorying of known systems out there that are critical and whether or not we have a disaster recovery plan and how the department went about identifying that it was a critical system and putting a plan together. We're not conducting any in-depth analysis of the plans themselves. We're kind of doing a data gathering mission to get a broad picture of what we know is out there. The more in-depth look is actually part of the work that will be conducted by Backbone that I'll flag a couple of items on the next slide for you. Does that address your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader?
Chair, I want to just go back to the consultation on affordable housing. I just want to say I very much appreciate and I am impressed with your assessment of all the moving parts that are happening. And I'm on a lot of those, and I'll follow up with you after the meeting. I look forward to work with you.
Thank you. Okay.
The second to last item on here is a staff direction where consulting and collaborating on the Results Minneapolis program. Results Minneapolis has been an initiative that's been going on for several years. It involves departments providing a report on their results. Some of the results haven't been necessarily useful to gauge how well the department's been doing. And as part of trying to refurbish and make that more useful, I know there's been a internal project on, I believe, collaboration with Johns Hopkins to do some sort of revision. And we're looking at this from usefulness to assess how well city departments are doing. And in part, it's going to be a potentially very useful tool for our purposes, because if we have excellent goals and metrics set up before the departments and the departments are reporting on these things, that cuts a lot of effort on our part for risk assessments, because we'll have some data out there that we can rely on as we're trying to figure out where there might be weaknesses in city operations.
Let me just chime in here, Mr. Vasiliev, to acknowledge that Councilmember Warsame and I greatly look forward to using the results work as we look to help with budget, future years' budgets, and to make this a bigger part of the process than it is today. So, thanks.
Thank you. The last item on here is following up on a consultation that was done in 2015, which identified that the way the city handles complaints internally differs between departments and between complaint types. And there's been an effort to kind of centralize them and to ensure that our ethics officer doesn't necessarily have to handle all of them by herself, and that the appropriate groups can all know the issues that are coming up before them, so that if it's one type of complaint, but it could have a fraud element, internal audit can be involved as appropriate. If there's an element of discrimination, HR can be involved appropriately.
Thank you.
And this last slide identifies the work that will be done by our IT auditors. The first item on here is a carryover from 2015, which was the first year that was identified we'd be doing some consultation with the police department on its updating of the police records management system. That's been in the works for many years by the police department, and I believe they're really kicking it off into high gear right now with some final testing and reviews. So this should be the last year that this appears on the audit plan as an item that we're working on. The next 4 items are kind of part of the business continuity system access theme that it seems like their work is going to entail this year. So the second item is taking a deep dive into how the IT department has done their business continuity. They've they have a lot of systems that the city runs. They've gone through an impact analysis process, and they've established some, definitely some business recovery plans. They've also had some potential effects from budgeting dollars that will be part of the assessment, is to review whether or not we're really effectively addressing the risks and have timely recovery plans for our critical systems from the IT perspective. The third item is a consultation. It's on HR's new separation process. HR put in a new process to identify how access should be cut off when somebody leaves the city. Backbone will be reviewing that and making sure that it's set up and functioning properly and that people are being terminated from the various systems timely. This will also be an opportunity for us to rope in that wider survey from the prior slide, and at least to make sure that all the critical systems we know of get flagged somehow during separation. The next two projects are deep dives into the continuity and also the business continuity and also the access controls for two critical systems we already know of that exist outside the IT department. The traffic control system and the system for the Minneapolis water are both run by Public Works IT staff rather than city IT staff. And so it made sense to address those critical systems that we currently know of and to ensure that they've got business continuity and disaster recovery plans that make sense, that are timely, and to make sure that they properly administer access to their systems and properly terminate access to their systems. The last item on here is the IT third-party risk management process, which is something that Mr. D'Souza mentioned earlier when speaking about One Neck, is to get into an assessment of how well IT manages risk with third parties as they're beginning contracts with them. That's the plan.
Great. Questions, thoughts? Nope. That concludes the rest of the 2018 audit plan scope for now anyway. So may I have a motion to receive and file this report? Moved by Councilmember Warsame, seconded by Mr. Fisher. All those in favor, could you please say aye? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and this motion passes. Finally, we'll have the report of our internal auditor department. Let's take a few minutes to look at the work in progress today. Mr. Vasiliev.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in this auditor report, we'll flag follow-up, progress, identify our work in progress, and then also look at staffing and some department-related information. Each year, the state auditor does a comprehensive annual financial report of this review of the city finances and the park board finances. This report gets presented to the audit committee sometime in June, depending on when it comes out, when the audit committee happens. We've had a staff direction in the past to provide an update to the audit committee on progress on any findings that were identified by the state auditor. And that is what you see before you today. The 2016 audit of the city financial statements identified 2 recurring and 2 new findings, 3 of which were corrected, and the finding related to federal award program procurement policies and procedures is still in progress. And we're working to develop, the city is working to develop policies and procedures to address that issue. The state auditor report of the park board identified 2 recurring findings and no new findings. One was for some adjusting journal entries, which the park board has completed, and one related to federal grants, cash management reporting requirements, which is still in progress. And this was one of the reasons why the grant audit is occurring this year is because this has been a recurring issue for federal grants for the park board, and we want to make sure that some of the smaller grants that the park board has are being managed adequately as well, because the state audit doesn't cover those, and to review how well the city's managing them, because as Councilmember Balmasano highlighted, it's a decentralized process. We have a few key people here and there at the city, but most departments have some sort of grant that they've applied for or are managing. We want to make sure that they're doing it appropriately. Here is a summary of the audit findings that were issued by the audit department, including a couple of lingering items that were issued by the audit team that was in place prior to the current staffing of the department in 2014. One thing I want to highlight for these is that with some of the staffing changes, we were lagging behind in our follow-up processes. So you'll see pending response on some of these. That's where we are waiting to hear back from the departments and to validate what they're providing to us. So it didn't seem fair to either pass or fail them, but rather to point out that things are still in the works for this. Here you can see that there's been progress made on a number of the older audits that were issued in 2016, and some of the audits that were issued in 2017 are still in the works. The next slide has a couple more projects that are specific to the park board, which are also still being worked on.
Mr. Vasiliev, I want to point out for my colleagues that some of these, for example, the CPED loan one that is on the other page, some of these were important to hold as findings and are now being looked at to remediate within like a software conversion, whether it's ELMS or LIMS, or I forget the acronym, but some of these are fixes that have been identified in audit, but then need to wait until some investments in the area take place. But they are, my understanding is, tracked by the department, and we track them as well. So.
Madam Chair, thank you. Yes, a number of these findings have kind of a grand solution. That's the end of a several-step process. Some of the initial steps were taken, but especially for the CPED one, one of the key resolutions to a lot of these is a replacement for a loan management system that was custom built for the city in, I don't know how many decades ago, I believe 25 years ago or so. So part of their plan that they provided to us as to how they would address the findings included, getting through the establishment and putting in place of this new system.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vasiliev, I'm impressed looking at the findings log at the number of incompletes, some going back 18 months to 2016. Could you further elaborate why there are so many and why it's taking so long to get some of them completed? You indicated, but I wasn't quite clear on what you're getting to on that.
Madam Chair, Mr. Fisher, part of our work is going out, communicating with the departments, getting the responses, and analyzing those. We had staffing changes towards the end of last year in October with the individual that was focused on doing this work. And as we were picking up the pieces and addressing the staffing departure with our director, in January we got caught up on some of those, but not all of those. In some cases, there will be delays because one finding depends on these other steps, and step one was delayed by a month, step two was now delayed by an extra month, and that cascades down. It really depends on a case-by-case basis. If there's a specific question, I can definitely look into the detail, but I don't have a nuanced answer for everyone off the top of my head. I apologize.
Mr. Vasiliev, It does not indicate, however, recalcitrance on the part of the auditee. It's more a staffing issue.
Madam Chair, Mr. Fisher, in terms of having the most cutting edge, most recent status, that's on us. In terms of some of the items getting delayed several months or even a year, that is part of the auditee's work to address the issues. As to why any one of those is lagging, I would need to get back to you, and in some cases this was what the department thought they could accomplish in this time frame, and reality was different. We haven't had anybody come back to us and say, we're looking at this and we decided just to not do it.
Thank you. I also want to point out that a former audit committee member suggested that we really keep track of these in every single meeting, go over the audit findings. So while it looks like just a really cursory look and that progress takes a while, it is helpful for us to keep it in front of ourselves and to keep working with the department. So I do appreciate this effort of keeping this table up to date. So thank you. Did you have anything more on your audit report?
Madam Chair, yes. First, a comment on your statement is, as part of any of our audit processes, if we've issued a recommendation and there's findings and recommendations on a report, for our process to finish out that audit, we must do our follow-up work. So this table is a reflection on work that we have to do to accomplish our jobs as auditors, and we're very happy to share it with you, but it's not a lot of extra work to assemble it. We're not doing it just for the audit committee. It's a critical part of our work.
Good point. Thanks.
And I already highlighted this very briefly, but there's 4 items that are getting carried over from the 2017 plan to the 2018 plan, which are our current work in progress. Backbone is working on the records management consultation. We are working actively on the Diversion Solutions third-party audit and the Minneapolis third-party audit, and we'll be picking up the payroll audit in the next few months, I expect. We had a little bit of background and data collection for that project last year, but we're almost beginning it fresh this year when the time is appropriate for finance to let us get back in there. And finally, I did want to highlight that we have a new staff member as of November of last year, Ethan Rockheim. And we are also anticipating a new senior internal auditor starting in the next week or two, which will bring us to 3 non-director FTEs for the first time ever, which is great and should help us actually accomplish that lengthy audit plan that was a few slides ago, because we'll have 3 sets of hands working on it. And of course, we have a vacancy of the internal audit director.
I have an announcement about that after you're done. So go ahead.
And then a few initiatives that we're working on that aren't really projects, but we are working on a policy procedure review and refresh. Some of the items we've still got out there for policies and procedures are carryover from the team that was in place from 2010 to 13. So it's definitely time to go back and take a look at those, and in part to try and connect what we're doing to the standards issued by the Institute of Internal Auditors, with a goal of getting a peer review done sometime in 2019 or 2020, depending on the timing. And the other initiative is we're working with City IT to look at some work paper management options to possibly replace a tool that we're currently using for work paper management. And they've been very helpful to help us see what our options are.
Thank you. I do also want to take a moment to announce, though Mr. Vasiliev just did, that our previous city internal auditor, Will Tetzel, did leave the city at the end of last year. He did go back to the private sector. We thank him for his service to the city of Minneapolis. I thank him especially in helping to build what was an empty audit department when he stepped in to the city here. And also to this committee. He did a lot of work to help us improve as a committee and as an oversight to what audit means to the city. So I think we've made a lot of progress in the last few years in terms of how audit functions, how we hold the public trust, and Will and his staff deserve a lot of credit for that work. So the internal audit position is now vacant and it is posted, and we will continue to keep the committee in the loop on our hiring process. Does anyone have any other announcements? Okay. The auditor's report is a receive and file motion, so may I have a motion for that?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. With that, colleagues, we've completed all the items on our agenda. So seeing no further business to be presented, this meeting is adjourned.